Welcome to Catholic Messenger Conversations podcast. Today, our conversation partner is Father Paul Appel, Judicial Vicar and Vice Chancellor for the Diocese of Davenport. He's also the pastor of Jesus Christ Prince of Peace Parish in Clinton. Our conversation is going to focus on marriage preparation, when it should begin and what it involves. Good topic. As Judicial Vicar, Father Paul leads the Diocese Tribunal Office, the court established by the Church to decide issues presented to it for resolution. Its primary function is to review petitions submitted for an ecclesiastical declaration of marriage nullity. Father Paul believes that good marriage preparation will help couples to stay married. It is imperative that young people witness both good examples of marriage and develop an understanding of what it takes to remain married to the same person for one's whole life. So that leads us to our first question.
Thanks, Barb. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. When should marriage preparation begin?
Marriage preparation ideally should begin when a child is still very young by looking at good examples of marriage. And we see that kids who come from good, stable marriages tend to have good, stable marriages themselves. Because one of the factors we see going on the negative side with divorce is that there's a good chance if someone is divorced, their parents have been divorced. And so if they see a good example of marriage when they're children, of self-sacrifice, of self-gift, of love, then they're going to tend to continue that on through their lives as well. Now, when you talk about the actual formal period of marriage preparation, most parishes will say they want that to start at least 6 months before the wedding day itself. That gives us time to go through some prep work with the priest and then possibly a married couple or a couple's retreat, and then have time to plan the liturgy and all those sorts of things. Sometimes we'll have a little bit of a surprise that occurs during the course of marriage prep, and if we have a little bit of time to absorb that, then it makes the rest of the process easier. So if you're out there wanting to get married sometime in the fall, now is the time to get started. And if you want to get married in the summertime, it might be a little late.
Father, isn't our diocese talking about, I know that in faith formation they're talking about moving marriage preparation even earlier, just in terms of helping children to understand those concepts?
Well, something the Holy Father has talked about is the importance of marriage, and I think our various offices in the diocese have taken that seriously to say, well, if marriage appears to be in crisis at some level, well, how can the Church help that? And I know that in our religious education programs, we do, of course, talk about the sacrament of marriage, but the actual course of the process, we continue to get new tools for that. So when a lot of priests So when I started this ministry 20 years ago as a newly ordained priest, we used something called the focus. And the focus was, at least at the parish I was at, still a hand-filled out form where you had to use a number 2 pencil and fill out the little circles like you did for the old tests at school. But now that has graduated to other programs that are online. Focus is still around. There have been some more. They've gone to an online version and taken on, after having gained a lot of data about how those programs worked, we're now better able offer more of that in different forms depending on where the couple is at. And as far as that prep work through like high school formation, I know that our curriculums are moving in that direction as well too. But.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Who should prepare young people for marriage?
Okay, well, that's another good question. As I said before, the parents need to be the first formators of their children in the ways of faith. And typically what we see happening in a lot of families is that the example of marriage is shown, not told. But I think there could be a little bit more deliberation in families about how they talk about marriage. In particular, how do you talk to a person of the opposite sex? What is the purpose of dating? What does the Church say about cohabitation or birth control or having children in general? What are the expectations that a family has in the context of marriage? And parents really need to be deliberate about saying things, about telling their children specifically, you don't date just to go out and have a good time. You should date as a preparation for a marriage and for a longer covenant. Now, by the time that person gets to the priest for their actual marriage prep, where they fill out the form and go to the retreat, most 95% of the formation work has already been done. So I'm trying to just get into that last 5% and say, okay, this is what the church offers, and maybe we can provide the icing on the cake. But if a person comes into my office already with the idea that divorce is common, marriage only lasts as long as my love lasts, that I'm only going to use this person to be my servant in the house, we're not going to have any kids, it's hard for me over the course of even 5 or 6 meetings to change the mind, or to change that mindset. So the mindset for marriage preparation has to begin at a young age. And then what the parish can help with is reinforcing those things, hopefully not just in marriage prep, but in homilies and in adult education classes and those sorts of things, so people clearly understand what the sacrament of marriage is about.
So they need to hear and to see, right? I mean, I'm thinking in the home, I know sometimes families, maybe the parents would, if they're going to argue or something, say, for example, that they go off somewhere else so the kids don't see that. When the rubber hits the road, it's not always a pretty scene, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not a strong marriage either, right?
Well, really what you're talking about is something we call problem solving. So all families are going to have problems, but the question is, how do you do it? So if, say mom and dad are trying to decide what color curtains they want in the dining room, well, the kids ought to be able to watch that conversation and say, well, are they going to get to a compromise, or are they going to pick one over the other, and why? And to let them see what a respectful conversation looks like, and let them see one of the parties change their mind. And in our modern polarized society, that's one of the hardest things to do.
Right.
Even go try to convince someone to change their mind about their favorite candy bar or their sports team, it's impossible, right?
Right, it is.
Now, change your mind in the context of a marriage, but marriage is different because that's what you promise to do.
Right.
You're promised to be willing to change for the benefit of the other person. The other person is making that same promise. And it's not just about compromise, because say mom wants red curtains and dad wants blue curtains. If you get purple curtains, well, nobody gets what they want.
Right.
So sometimes a compromise isn't possible. You have to pick one over the other. So kids should see that. Now, if mom and dad are having a bigger argument or something that's on a more sensitive issue, go out for a drive, go out, close the door in the bedroom and have it out. But kids, for the most part, need to see how a problem can arise, can be discussed, and then how the problem can be resolved. Again, marriage problems will tend to come up when there's no resolution to the issue. The things get discussed a little bit, but there's never an end to it. And then tomorrow you're fighting the same fight.
Right. Maybe we need reminders on our kitchen or on the refrigerator or something that just, okay, here are some of the things to help you cool down, or to, you know what I mean? Because like you said, every couple is going to have some challenges, and the kids are, it's not a perfect world. Kids are going to see that. And this can even happen in healthy marriages, I believe.
Yeah. So you can have a marriage that looks very good from the outside, but if somebody is holding on to a resentment, and we talk about this now in spiritual terms, that can really become like an infected wound.
Yeah.
And it might be something small, but if it's never resolved, it can just fester and grow and get bigger and bigger. And then one day, someone explodes with this resentment they've been holding the whole time. And we've had some marriages that we've analyzed in the tribunal that have gone on for 50 years.
Oh, wow.
All in misery, all because of something that happened on the day of the wedding.
Oh, my God.
There was some slight from a family member, or things didn't go just the right way, and it soured the whole relationship, and they never got over it.
Oh, my God.
It does happen. You'd think people would learn to forgive, because we do preach that, but it does happen.
Wow. So what are some of the key ingredients in helping young people to develop a realistic understanding of what it takes to stay married to the same person for one's whole life? Because we live in a culture that's just not permanency.
Yeah, one of the words you mentioned is realistic.
Yeah.
So a realistic understanding of marriage. And people can get into marriage with a distorted understanding of what marriage is, because maybe they're trying to base it on their favorite novel or a favorite movie, or because their parents never fought in front of them, they'll think they never fought. And so the first time they have a fight in their marriage, they think, oh, it's all over. So what is a realistic understanding of marriage? It is that there will be times of poverty in your marriage. There may be times of sickness. There may be times where you're having difficulty with a child. There may be times where, one person has to pick up stakes and leave their favorite job to go follow the other person where they're going.
Mm-hmm.
To go through in your mind and thinking about some of those more difficult scenarios and how would you handle them? Do you have enough flexibility in your own heart and mind that you could change and grow with this person? One of the old Latin words we use to describe marriage is called the consortium totus vitae. And I'll put you on the spot here. Do you know what consortium means?
I think that means to come together.
So it actually comes from a Latin word that means to roll the dice together.
Oh, okay.
So a consortium totus vitae means that you're taking a chance together on life.
Okay.
You're going to roll the dice and see what happens.
Yeah.
And to not have everything planned out such to the extent that if something differs from your expectation that you give up, but understand that human beings are complex and we change and we grow.
Right. Yeah.
And every few years you might have to then reintroduce yourself to this person and say,
"Oh, that's a good idea."
It's not like it was when we were first married.
Yes.
It's different now.
Yeah.
So to bring in a little bit of realism and see the person as a real person and not just an object or someone who lives in an ivory tower. This is the perfect person I could ever marry. And maybe some of you did marry the perfect person. That's great.
Yeah.
And God bless you for that. But a lot of us, we're full of faults and failings, and part of marriage is understanding. That one person accepts the other for who they are, and the other person does the same in return.
My husband and I attended something through the Faith Formation Office. It was a marriage retreat, a prayer retreat, and they talked about the importance of prayer in marriage. And my husband and I do morning and evening prayer, and that's just something that starts and ends the day. And I'm just wondering, that seems to be a real solidifying kind of
and the
foundation.
The prayer piece of it is very important. It's a question I'll ask my couples who are coming in for marriage prep is, did you pray together first or move in together first or sleep together first or kiss first, something like that. And they have never prayed together. Very, very, very rarely do I find a couple who has prayed together. And I'll say, well, why haven't you prayed together? Well, Father, that's far too intimate. I don't share my prayer life with anybody. But the other aspects of life, all that is fine. But really, a healthy relationship should start with getting to know the other person and then praying, understanding their relationship with God. Because in the Christian understanding of marriage, it is really three in the marriage. It is the husband, the wife, and God. And that is what makes Christian marriage different from a civil marriage or a natural marriage. So that aspect of prayer, of course, is something I encourage all couples to do together. Even if you're when you lay down to bed at night, just pray glory be together.
Right.
And that's all it takes to get started.
Exactly. And when you start small, it sort of becomes a habit, and it builds up. And it's just something that becomes such a regular part of your life. And I just think it's really, then God's there. God is reminding you who you are and whose you are, I think. I'm wondering, what are the most significant challenges young couples face today regarding a commitment to marriage? I mean, you're seeing far more than I am what's happening with young couples. Well,
and this has been going on for a long time. Social media does play a part. If we see young couples in trouble, it's usually because they have not put their full attention on their new spouse. They're still keeping up with friends on Facebook or maybe an old flame or something like that, and that can cause some pretty serious trust issues early on. Also, couples that enter into marriage with the idea that we just have to have a little bit in common in order to get married. And so a priest friend of mine told me a story of a couple he was working with that they married because they both loved the same junk food and the same TV shows, and they had so much in common.
Oh, wow.
And then a few years later, they realized, well, everybody loves junk food and watching TV, but we don't have anything in common. So they had to completely reset their relationship and find out where the commonalities really were. And so try to get to a deeper understanding of what you really want in marriage. Couples will then at the beginning they'll think, well, we're not interested in having kids yet, so we're not even going to discuss it. And then a year or two down the line, one person decides they're ready to start a family, the other person does not. And in a society that's so much embraces contraception and birth control and putting off family or just having one kid, that can really be a problem as well when we're built as human beings to be part of a family. And when that biological urge kicks in where you want to have 3 or 4 kids, if both parties are not in step on that, that can cause some division as well. So if I were to caution people when they're getting into marriage, like what are those early challenges, you've got to have a career plan, of course, because money is always a problem no matter what age you're in. Yeah. If it's a problem, it's a problem. So get your career buttoned down, you have a clear understanding of what family life looks for you, and then your full attention needs to be on your spouse. Put away the phone for a while, put away scrolling on social media or your old friends, focus on that relationship with your new spouse primarily and get that strong. And if you go out and socialize together, do that together, especially in the first few years of marriage, because if you're still acting like a bachelor or a single person, that's not going to build into a strong relationship down the line.
How about, so many couples now come from different faith backgrounds coming together, and it's not Catholics marrying Catholics. It might be Catholics marrying Protestants or people who have never seen the doors of a church.
And I can talk to that a little bit with another story. There was a young man who came into my office at one of my parishes, and he was getting ready for marriage, and then I got to meet his fiancée, and I was surprised because they were both Catholic. It happened so rarely that 2 Catholics marry one another that I said, how did this happen? I was just amazed. And he said, well, Father, a few years ago I was on a blind date with this beautiful redhead, and the date went very well. We had a nice dinner, wonderful conversation, and on the car ride home, she asked me, what is your religion? And he said, well, I'm Catholic. And she said, well, I'm Baptist, or plug in any other religion. I think that's what she said. And she said, well, would you become a member of my church if we got married? And he said, well, I hadn't been in church in years, but I knew that the faith was important to me, so I kind of stumbled a little bit, and I said, well, no, I think I would stay Catholic. And so she said, well, it was a very nice date, but this is our last date. And then for him, he had never considered his religion as part of courtship, but clearly this young woman had. For her, she wanted somebody who shared her values, shared her faith background, and was only going to date somebody who shared that same core value as her. So he completely changed the way that he was going out on dates. Rather than just picking the prettiest girl in the tavern, he decided to look for somebody who shared his values. And when that happened, then he met this girl, and they got married, and they eventually had some kids and did well. So the understanding of faith, though, when you're in your 20s, as we see in our culture now, is not always at the forefront of someone's mind.
Right.
But I'll encourage you all to future-proof your relationship and say if there's something that is so deeply set in your being as your religion, as your likes or your pet peeves, make sure you've got somebody that shares some of those same things or doesn't aggravate you in one of those ways so that you don't have to now build a whole new foundation to go on. That's not to say that mixed religion marriages don't work. They often do. But it is just another point of friction that can happen in a relationship that you really need to be aware of before you take your vows.
I'm wondering, too, when should young people learn the concept of marriage covenant? Do people really understand? They understand maybe the word commitment, but do they understand what a covenant is? So
there are 2 concepts that we deal with in the tribunal, and the first is the idea of permanence. Most people understand that marriage is permanent. And when you sign the marriage papers at the courthouse or at the church, the understanding is that this is a permanent bond. You can't go down to the courthouse and request a 5-year marriage certificate or a 10-year marriage certificate. The assumption is it's for life. However, the modern understanding of permanence is that it's permanent as long as my love lasts, or it's permanent as long as the person does not betray me, or it's permanent as long as I feel like it is. Because most states have no-fault divorce. If you just decide you want a divorce, you go file the papers, and that's it. There's very little the other party can do about it. Now, that is not the same as what we call indissolubility, because with a permanence understanding of marriage, you could be married permanently, but things fall apart, you get divorced, and then remarry. That is the civil understanding of what marriage is. You enter into a new permanent marriage after the old permanent marriage failed. But for the church, we believe in indissolubility, that once a marriage covenant is ratified through the vows and you take on the sacrament, it is forever. And you then are not free to remarry because you have a spiritual vowed bond with this other person. And if the sacrament really took place, then it was God's choice for you to marry and not just your own. So when we look at what the marriage tribunal does, is we look at the state of mind of the persons when they took on the covenant of marriage. Was there something lacking that prevented the sacrament from taking place? So, for instance, if somebody shows up stone drunk to their wedding, but they kind of mumble through the vows, that's not a sacramental marriage because they were not of right mind when they said the words. Or if somebody was, as they're saying the vows, they hold their fingers behind their back, crossed, and say, well, I'm going to agree to all of this except for fidelity. I'm just going to hold that one back for myself. And if we can prove that that was their mindset going into the marriage, then, again, the marriage didn't take place. So we declare that the marriage is what did not take place, and now the person is free to marry legitimately for the first time. So couples need to understand that the marriage bond is there as a way to strengthen them through trial. That when things get tough and you feel like you want to, pick up stakes and run, the vow should be that glue that holds them together through those tough times. Because for most of human life, there are going to be some difficult times you go through, but the couple should learn to communicate, work those things out, come to new understanding, and then have a stronger bond at the other end of that difficulty. But our society, because we have so many options for choice or for changing our minds, it can be very hard for couples to want to work through that because the other option is so much easier. But remember, God is calling you to a permanent, indissoluble relationship that mirrors his love for the church. He loves the church in that way, that he will never abandon us. In the same way, married couples should be reflecting that to the rest of the world.
Wow. Young people today also come from a wide range of families: two-parent families, single-parent families, blended families, adopted families, foster families, and grandparents' parents' families. How do those scenarios affect and shape marriage preparation efforts?
Yeah, and most of the couples we see who come forward from that situation mostly will say, I don't want what my family had.
Yeah.
If they come from a non-traditional home or they've got a single-parent situation, many times they'll be saying, I really want to work hard to have a stable relationship that lasts for life. That's what they're craving their whole life. But without good examples or good formation, that can be very hard to attain. Because if you've never seen it, how do you know how to do it, right?
Right.
And this is something where churches can step in and say, well, here are some good examples. Like I said before, we show the example of God's love for the church. We might hold up some examples of saints who were married. We might then ask our married couples to put on, to act as a sponsor couple in the parish and show those good examples of married life so that young people, even if they don't have that at home, can see that when they go to their church.
I think that's the more concrete example, is to have sponsor couples or, to journey with, because, you can tell people and have them read the literature, but they do need to see as well as hear and read, right? I mean,
Right.
They need to see it in action.
And I think, people who grew up in the 40s, 50s, 60s could probably look at television and say, oh, these are all wholesome family units. But it's a little bit harder to find now. And where do you say, oh, go watch this movie or go watch this TV show, and you're going to find, just a standard example of what human life might look like. They're always dramatized in some way or made, I don't want to say unrealistic, but more modern. And how do you then find good examples of that? That could be a challenge for young people if they don't have that at home. Yeah.
Right. And then I'm wondering, too, we kind of addressed this. What role do prayer, sacraments, and the liturgy play in successful marriages?
Well, and many people, especially the girls, will spend a lot of time thinking about what their wedding day looks like. They'll be thinking about how it's going to be decorated and what church it's going to be at and all that. But remember that part of a successful marriage is also becoming a part of that church family, that community of faith. It shouldn't be just the place you show up to on the day of the marriage, get all the pictures, and then disappear forever. Take time now to build relationships with people in the parish. You know, the young men can join the Knights of Columbus, and the young women can join the Altar and Rosary or the Sodality, whatever they have at your parish. Try to find some way to become involved there and get to know, because if you just try to do this all by yourself, you might not make it. It's going to be a lot harder. But the church offers a community, it offers a relationship. And then when you're building your liturgy of how the wedding day is going to look, now you've got some context there where you might know the musician now. You might know the church choir. You might understand who's going to do the readings, because I know see this person at Mass on Sunday, and then get to know your priest as well. And build that relationship.
So maybe you should have been going to that church for a while before you get married then. Or, I mean, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because when I got married, I so wanted to get married in my home parish where I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. But now that I'm thinking about that, that was probably purely nostalgia as opposed to anything else, because I certainly wasn't going to return to that parish because I was living somewhere else. And I wonder how many times people don't really think about that, about thinking that you're also, when you're getting married, you're becoming part of a parish family.
Yeah, that's very common. So people will go back to their home parish where they grew up because that's who they're familiar with. That's who they know. But that's a sign for the priest doing the marriage prep that, you haven't gone to church since you left home. You haven't built up a relationship somewhere else. And that can be a red flag in marriage prep. If you're coming to the church for marriage and yet you're not attending anywhere on Sunday, well, what does that say about your ability to commit, to take on responsibility, to meet new people? There's a lot of things there that become a subject of conversation.
But in my case, I was going to a parish in Clinton, and at St. Patrick, which no longer exists, and my husband to be was going to Mass with me there. So it wasn't that. We were going to Mass on a weekly basis, but I still wanted at that point to get married. But I hadn't thought about it that why did I want to get married in that? Well, I had thought about why I wanted to get married in my home parish, but I hadn't thought about the idea that, no, this is my parish, my family parish, not the one from my childhood.
Right.
So maybe that's just, I don't know if other people have had that sort of sentiment. I'm also wondering, why are fewer young people choosing to enter sacramental marriages?
I don't know that. I guess I'd have to look at the numbers on that. I think it's just a matter of, Catholics for a long time have had smaller families. And so one of the reasons we've seen a demographic shift is just people aren't having as many kids, and so there aren't that many around. And the young Catholics who are around are moving to tend to go to bigger cities. If I talk to my pastor friends who had big parishes in big towns, they're busy with weddings all the time.
Oh, okay.
In small town Iowa, it might be a little more difficult because we've got some brain drain. We've got people who have moved away, and that is something that is just affecting our demographics here. But also people have a hard time making a commitment. They just want to have something that is much more simple, or have a destination wedding because that's what they've seen in the magazines. And if they don't have that personal relationship with their parish where they live, it's going to be more common that they go somewhere else. And we're seeing a lot of that.
How do you dissuade couples from focusing on destination weddings or do-it-yourself events that are so prevalent today?
Well, they don't really ask me. So I tend to try to talk to the kids in high school about the proper way, the proper understanding of a Catholic marriage, which is you get married in the church before a priest to someone of your same faith tradition, and then everything else should be an exception rather than the rule.
Okay.
But again, if this is common what they see in their culture, that's going to be what they are going to chase after, because that becomes the dream that they have. Yep.
Okay. Last question. What insights have you gained about sacramental marriage in your tribunal ministry? I mean, you've kind of addressed some of them here.
I think one big issue is just learning to communicate, having clear expectations, actually saying what is on your mind and not dancing around an issue. In the context of a marriage, you've got to be completely open and honest with your parishioner about everything from your finances to your expectations in the bedroom to your career. All those things have to be open, honest, and clear with the other person prior to marriage, and then consistently reinforce that all the way through marriage as well. Never stop communicating. Always keep that door open and talking about what's going on in your life. And the other person in your marriage should be the first person you go to when you have a concern or a problem. That's not your boss, not someone at work, not a buddy from high school. You got to talk to your spouse first.
Yes. Okay. I appreciate that. I don't have any other questions. I think you have addressed many of the questions we need to talk about preparation for marriage.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me. It was a good conversation.
Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Catholic Messenger Conversations.